This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
All right, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a moment of extreme intellectual crisis. It's this philosophical journey that really kicks off when the church, which was the absolute center of Western knowledge for centuries, starts to decline. So what happens when that gravitational center of meaning just collapses? What are you left with?
It's a terrifying question, really. And our sources, they just dive right into that philosophical scramble of the 20th century. I mean, when Nietzsche said God is dead, he wasn't just talking theology.
No, not at all.
He was talking about a huge institutional and cosmological vacuum. So our mission today is to trace what happened right after that desperate search for a new absolute, a God substitute. We're going to follow that lineage of thinkers, Sartre, Heidegger, who tried to fill the void, and then contrast them with the one guy who, just refused to find a replacement, Albert Camus.
Right.
This whole deep dive is about understanding what humans entrust the weight of their existence to when that traditional faith is gone.
And that's the key context, right? We're not just talking about some crisis of belief. We're talking about the collapse of the institution that held a monopoly on truth, with a capital T. After the Enlightenment, the church knew it couldn't be the sole possessor of doctrine anymore, so it made a huge pivot.
And what's so fascinating is how it transitions. It goes from a religion of dominance to essentially a meaning-giving community, a social stabilizer.
So it finds a new role.
Exactly. Science was taking over medicine, physics, all of that. So the church moves into the gaps. It starts providing welfare, running orphanages, and maybe most importantly, offering confession and counsel.
So it becomes the prototype for modern psychological counseling.
It really does, providing that emotional stabilization through ritual and community.
So even as the philosophers are debating the very nature of being, the church solidifies its practical role. It's providing comfort and structure. It's holding the line, but it's not the center of gravity anymore, politically or academically.
And that structural shift creates the perfect environment for the philosophical tragedy our sources get into. The generation of thinkers that bravely embraced God's death and all the radical, dizzying freedom that came with it, they ultimately couldn't handle it, the sheer burden of freedom.
Yeah.
The sources suggest a lot of them just panicked and immediately started looking for a new external power to replace that void. The weight of infinite choice was just crushing.
And that idea, the burden of freak, that's so crucial. Okay, so let's look at the two big figures who try to offload that burden. Let's start with Jean-Paul Sartre. After defining this radical individual freedom, where does he end up entrusting the meaning of existence?
Sartre, he chooses to delegate meaning to collective history, to human society.
And he goes to Marxism.
He goes hard into Marxism, and later, very controversially, even Maoism. I mean, his whole foundational idea was existence precedes essence. You are nothing but your choices.
Right, you define yourself.
But facing the massive responsibility that comes with that, defining not just yourself, but all of humanity, it was too much. He starts looking for redemption, not in some personal spiritual thing, but in achieving a perfect social and political structure.
Wait, so when he embraces Marxism, is that a betrayal of his whole idea of radical freedom? Or did he just believe that real individual freedom could only happen after some kind of collective salvation was achieved?
He did. He basically substituted God with the perfect future society.
So he engaged in this huge act of delegation.
A profound act of delegation. He handed off the terrible responsibility of creating meaning to the collective project. And the sources are clear on this, that choice stabilized his anxiety, but his philosophy of individual liberation got sucked into collective salvation.
And that brings us to Martin Heidegger. His story is much, much darker, and it shows the danger of this substitution so clearly. He starts by seeking being as this sort of godless God, but he falls into the exact same temptation.
Yeah. Exactly the same, delegation. In 1933, he makes this catastrophic error of entrusting all that existential meaning to the collective, specifically to the nation, the Volk and its so-called destiny or Schicksal.
And his public loyalty to the Nazi regime wasn't just political, it was philosophical.
It was. He argued that the whole mission of the university was to guide the spirit of the nation toward its destined being.
Okay, we have to pause here because our sources draw this really important distinction. The difference between believing, glauben, and entrusting, or Anvertrauen. Why is that so critical?
It's everything. It's the difference between taking ownership and just handing over the keys. Belief, in this sense, is an internal responsibility. You commit to your convictions, and that burden is still yours to carry.
Okay.
But entrusting or delegating is the act of handing that burden off to something else. a powerful external concept or a group. Think of it like this. It's managing your own difficult, complex finances. That's belief. Versus just blindly handing your entire life savings over to some charismatic, unregulated guru. That's entrusting.
I see. That's a powerful analogy.
And Heidegger's choice to entrust the weight of existence to the Volk was a complete surrender of philosophical responsibility. He wasn't seeking faith. He was seeking delegation to a collective master.
The moment they stopped seeking self-mastery, they needed a master. So if Sartre and Heidegger represent this lineage of substitution, the people who just couldn't stand the vacuum, then Albert Camus just stands completely alone as the contrast, the courage of non-reliance.
Camus is the anomaly. He's born in the same godless era, but according to our sources, he was the only human who never submitted to any new god. He stared right into that same void that terrified his peers, and he just refused to flinch.
He saw the universe as silent.
Utterly silent, completely unresponsive to human reason or desire.
Which brings us to his most famous idea, the absurd. L'absurde. And it's so often misunderstood as just nihilism, but it's much more active than that, isn't it?
It is. The absurd isn't the meaninglessness of the world itself, it's the conflict. It's that unavoidable, painful clash between our innate, desperate desire for meaning.
And the universe's cold, absolute silence.
And Camus accepted this conflict as the fundamental condition for living. It's not something you cure, it's something you live with.
And his response to this condition wasn't surrender, it was revolt. Revolt. Let's clarify that, because it's not just, political uprising.
No, his revolt is deeply ethical. It means you have to constantly stand up against the meaninglessness of the world like Sisyphus with his stone. But, and this is the crucial part, you have to do it without installing some new ideological myth in its place.
So no new gods.
No new gods. It's a refusal to be comforted by lies, whether they come from a church, a nation, or a political party. It's about living passionately within the known limits of the human condition, which is finite.
And this purity, this refusal to pick a new absolute, that's what led to the huge split with Sartre in 1952. Sartre basically accused him of being politically useless because he wouldn't endorse the violence needed for a Marxist revolution.
And Camus's response was definitive. He said, "Any idea that sheds human blood is just a new mythology." He understood that any political ideology, once it's elevated to an absolute, it just becomes a new religion demanding human sacrifice. So he chose isolation. He chose the courage of godless sincerity. And in doing so, he showed what true existentialism is. It's the philosophy of how to live without entrusting that burden to anything or anyone else.
And if we circle back to Heidegger for a moment, we can see the structural flaw in his thinking that allowed it to become so dangerous.
Yeah.
The sources point out that he took being away from the concrete, messy human experience of being unto death.
He abstracted it. He turned it into a kind of godless theology.
Right.
When you remove being from the finite reality of human death, from our actual unstable existence, you make it vague, transcendent.
And dangerously disconnected from any kind of rational check.
Exactly.
What you're left with is this abstract concept of being that then becomes an open container for political myth. That's the mechanism, isn't it?
That is the core mechanism. When philosophy creates a powerful, empty container, political forces will always rush in to fill it. And the sources cite this disturbing parallel. Just as Heidegger entrusted being to the German nation, the Japanese Kyoto school, they imported that exact philosophical structure.
No way.
Yes, and they entrusted that transcendent being to their own pre-existing absolute day. The emperor and the national body, the kokutai.
So the end result in both cases is that a philosophy that was supposed to liberate the individual becomes a philosophy of dependence.
Precisely.
The existential anxiety that you were supposed to bear is now stabilized by this greater thing, the nation, the destiny. And that tragically enables political violence. It glorifies dying for a myth.
The failure of substitution is right there. Anxiety is relieved through delegation, not self-acceptance.
But fortunately, this philosophy of delegation wasn't the end of the story for 20th century thought. A completely different stream of philosophy ultimately won the day, one that prioritized testing over entrusting.
Absolutely. While the existentialists were wrestling with the void, you had empiricism, positivism, and especially pragmatism. People like Peirce, William James, John Dewey. They were just getting to work. The whole attitude just shifted dramatically. It became simply, do not believe, verify.
And pragmatism just redefined truth entirely. It bypassed that whole metaphysical mess. Truth was no longer some eternal transcendent thing. It was just a concept that actually works.
That's it. Does it function reliably in observable human experience?
Yes or no?
This functional, practical approach completely sidestepped the need for the old God or a philosophical substitute. And in our modern world of AI, engineering, policy, that standard is almost exclusive. We don't ask if a plan is metaphysically right. We ask, does it function? Can we verify the results?
And that approach won because it delivered results, where abstraction just delivered violence.
So what does this whole journey from entrusting to verifying actually mean for how we live now?
Yeah, what's the takeaway?
Well, it leads us to this model our sources call the two-story life. The first story is the life of reason. This is where we spend most of our time. In daily life, science, society, you have to maintain this relentless attitude of verifying. You have to use reason to control chaos and make progress.
So we have to be pragmatists in our jobs and our policies.
Yeah.
Rely on tested results, observable facts.
Precisely. But then there's a second story, the life of existentialism. And that's the unique, singular moment when you confront death. Because at that moment, empirical verification, social constructs, even organized religion, they all lose their function. All that external meaning just falls away.
So existentialism isn't a continuous lifestyle. It's the mental horizon one inevitably reaches when you face the absolute limits of reason and life itself.
And that's the synthesis. To live a life of verifying honesty in that first story, to reject the temptation to delegate our responsibility to political myths or abstract gods, that's the best possible preparation for that final, honest moment, when all the external supports are stripped away and only your pure existence remains.
And that requires the courage of Camus' non-reliance.
Exactly.
So this whole history, it's a trajectory from entrusting to verifying and finally to just accepting the human condition. And if we really are living fully in this age of verification, always testing, always checking, it makes you wonder, what, if anything, are we implicitly entrusting our own profound, unverifiable anxieties to today? That's something to explore on your own.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.